Welcome to our podcast where we look for opportunities in our lives to see a beautiful view. I'm Paul.
And I'm Candy. Thank you for joining us again today.
If you like what we're doing here, we would love to invite you to join us at the Beautiful View Patreon channel. We really appreciate your support.
When you join our Patreon, we will send you a Beautiful View sticker. They turned out so cool.
Yes, they did.
We'll give you a shout out on the show, and every Monday morning you will receive a weekly newsletter with insider information and encouragement for your week.
Memberships are only $5 a month. You can find the link in our show notes. Also, if you are a business owner, then we have a great opportunity for you to become a sponsor of the Beautiful View podcast. If you're interested in sponsoring the show, send us an email at beautifulviewpod@gmail.com.
We are so excited to share with you again today. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the beautiful view.
We could climb a mighty mountain, float on down a winding river, travel back in time and face our future too. I'm not scared of where I'm going, 'cause I know whose hands I'm holding. Oh, I'd go anywhere as long as you're going to. Well, I'd go anywhere as long as I'm with you.
Today's episode is called Drive Through History.
Yeah. So our kids are getting as big of a kick out of our podcast as we are. So when we were talking the other day about it, I was asking Emily what she thought we should talk about in an upcoming episode. And she said that she thought it would be really cool if we talked about some of the time that we spent traveling all over the country learning about American history. Most of these stops were between 2016 and 2017.
Now, I don't know if we'll be able to cover everything in this podcast. I mean, all the details, let alone be absolutely factually accurate on our understanding of U.S. history. We are not experts. We are tourists, but we'll share
tourists.
Very good tourists, but we'll share some of the stops we made, things we learned, and how those things affected us as a family.
Yeah. I am so thankful for the rich, hands-on education we have been able to give our children. There's something about standing on historical grounds, whether a battlefield, a landmark, a historical home, a burial site, that just makes the history book stories come to life.
You can read about something in a textbook all day long, or watch a documentary, as I prefer to do, and never grasp the realness of the history. But learning this way, boots on the ground, as it were, was such an immersive, eye-opening experience.
Yeah. And it wasn't just the kids who learned a lot either. There were a lot of things that I'm sure I learned a long time ago in a history class, but, you know, just for the test.
Wow.
Sorry, Miss Shelton.
Oh, dear.
But you cannot beat experiential learning.
So hop in the truck with us and take a little drive through history as we experienced it.
We spent a lot of time near Dayton, Ohio in 2016. One of my favorite experiences was when we attended a Native American powwow at Sunwatch Indian Village and Archaeological Park. So this place is an excavation site where they discovered many ancient structures, artifacts, and burial grounds. Using the information that they found and the research of the ancient people who lived there, they have reconstructed this really cool village and all the structures and their original 13th century locations. It was really neat.
Yeah, it was cool to be able to walk into the buildings that they had reconstructed. So these were just replicas, but you were able to walk in there and sit down and kind of get a feel,
right?
Yeah,
like
for
what their life would have been like,
right? And so it was really neat, and to see the dances take place. It was just a cool deal.
Yeah, they were in full like headgear and get up and everything. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
We got some really cool pictures from that. We'll have to post some on our social media.
Oh, we are going to be posting photos from this podcast for sure.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Yeah. We also visited the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. Of course, that area is where the Wright brothers were. And so we did the Wright Brothers Museum as well while we were there. So they have the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. And Tyler was a little guy back then, and he just loved all the planes.
I think that was around the time that the Disney planes came out.
Yes, the movie planes.
Right?
Yeah,
I think so.
That was really neat. So we got to see the SR-71 Blackbird there, which is a really fascinating plane for me to see in real life. I love that.
Yeah.
They also had like a reconstruction of the space shuttle, which we actually got to see the real thing a little later on our trip. But it was just, I went back there. I think we were trying to remember. I thought it was 3 times.
I think that might have been right. Yeah.
I think I kind of couldn't get enough of that.
Yeah, it was a lot. I think I went 2 of the 3 times. I was like, after the second time, I was like, okay, you're on your own, buddy. A plane is a plane.
She had enough. By that
it was
point.
neat though. Another one of my favorite Ohio stops was the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati. The kids had been learning all about the Underground Railroad, so this was a perfect stop, though it was a really heavy one. It was very eye-opening, educational, and super emotional.
Yes, it was.
It was a great opportunity, though, to have big conversations about hard things like slavery and civil rights with our kids. I'm telling you, you can learn about this stuff in a textbook, and it just feels like it happened a long time ago to people far, far away. But when you're standing where these things actually took place, you just feel the heaviness of the history. The location of this museum recognizes the significant role of Cincinnati in the history of the Underground Railroad, because thousands of slaves escaped to freedom by crossing the Ohio River. Many of them found refuge in the city, some staying there temporarily before heading north to gain freedom in Canada. Feeling history is very different from just learning about it.
Yeah, I think they did a really great job of immersing you in the sights, sounds, and smells even, because they had some artifacts from that time period.
Yes.
And so it made it very real. It was stark, I would say.
There was a little house down the way that belonged to a pastor there, and he lived right on the Ohio River. And we didn't make it to the house, but we watched a little video about it. That was one of the main stops when people crossed the river, that they knew that was a safe place. He was on the Underground Railroad. It was interesting.
That was his mission, as he saw it at the time. That was his place in God's plan at that point in time.
It was. It's fascinating.
Our next stop was the Flight 93 National Memorial in Pennsylvania. And this was kind of a very important stop for us, as it is for so many.
You were still in England at the time, and I was here in the States, and you were supposed to fly over here on the 13th of September that year.
Right. So obviously I didn't, and we had to change our plans, but that was, for our kids, it probably was like looking at something way back in the annals of history.
Isn't that weird that
but for
it's
us,
so real to us?
Yeah,
I'm sure there are things in our parents' lives too that were so real to them that happen, and to us it just feels like history.
Yeah, it just feels like and I think that was the big part of doing this for us, when we were talking about taking something out of the textbook and trying to immerse yourself in what the actual story was.
Right.
That was part of this. So the Flight 93 Memorial is really set up very well to kind of, give you as best of a picture as you can of what happened there. I just thought it was very peaceful. There's this path that you walk down where you can get real close to the crash site. And of course, now you would never know. I mean, other than a few missing trees.
Yeah.
But it's just a beautiful, peaceful place to be. And then in the museum itself, you got to pick up a telephone receiver from that time, and listen to the recordings of people's cell phone calls out of the plane.
The panic and
the panic. It just it was something.
It was something. And that park ranger, we sat and listened to a park ranger tell stories about some of the individuals that were on the plane, and list them by name, and then tell about what was happening, what their, where they were heading, what they were doing. And he did a really good job of making that whole thing come to life. And
yes,
you know what? That was a really hard one, but I'm really glad that we stopped.
Yes. And we had already done the World Trade Center.
Yeah. You and I had. Yeah, the kids haven't been there.
So we had been to see the Eternal Waterfalls, the footprints of the Twin Towers. And actually when we were there, they were constructing the new center as well as the memorial.
Yeah.
This was a pilgrimage of sorts.
So our next stop was Gettysburg. We visited the museum there. We toured the cemetery. We saw where Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. We saw so many tombstones, and many of those tombstones were unmarked. They were for unknown soldiers.
Yeah.
Such a tragic part of our country's history. So much bloodshed. We purchased the self-guided auto tour, the audio auto tour,
yes,
from the gift shop, and spent the rest of the day driving around to the different spots on the tour.
On CD.
It was on CD, and we have a CD player in our truck.
Yes, because our truck is of the right age to be able to play one of those things. Each stop on that audio tour featured a significant part of the Battle of Gettysburg. And it was actually standing on these grounds where you could fully appreciate the weight of the history that happened there.
Yeah. I found it really powerful. And there was, I specifically remember there was one building as we drove past, that there was a big hole in the side. And on the audio tour, it said that was a cannonball hole.
Yeah.
Like it was left there as that was just, it was really fascinating.
And again, that area is beautiful and very peaceful.
Yeah.
But you start to sort of like absorb those surroundings, and your imagination kicks in.
Yeah.
And you can just place yourself at a very different time, same place, very different time, different atmosphere altogether.
Yeah.
But it really helped to be there.
Yeah, and the audio tour, so you drive to a place, you park, and you listen to whatever happened there. So say you're looking out over a field, and the audio tour will say, do you see the giant rock over there to your right? That's where these guys hid, and they, it just... Wow.
Yeah.
It really made it come to life.
Yeah, with sound effects of the time and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
That was powerful. So our next stop was Washington, D.C. This was a first for all of us. We did all the touristy sightseeing stops, and that was when we took a double-decker tour bus tour around. And
top deck. You got to do the top deck.
Yes, it was really cool riding that around Washington, D.C. But some of the stops on that tour were the Capitol building.
Yes.
The White House, of course, the National Mall, the National Archives, the National Cemetery, and all the memorials. So we got to see a lot of really neat things there.
Yeah, standing in front of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, yes.
And just looking at it, and it's not a replica. And
right.
So you're trying to okay, this is the real
thing.
It
with
was,
real signatures. It's pretty cool.
Wild.
Yeah.
Then we carried on into Virginia. And we stopped at the Appomattox Courthouse, where General Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant, officially ending the Civil War. And now in Bellevue, Iowa, we live across the river from the city that he grew up in, which is Galena, Illinois. And so we've been into Galena several times, went to the museum there and saw where he worked. That's really interesting.
Our next historical stop was in Atlanta, Georgia, to the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historic Site. It's a whole kind of several blocks in the city, but within that area, it includes his birth home, the house he was born in, to the church that he pastored, to the museum that told the story of his life, and then also where he was laid to rest.
So we'd learned so much about the Civil War up to this point. So the kids were fascinated to learn all about Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement and how those issues from the Civil War had carried forward into the modern age.
Yeah. It was really great learning experience. I think one of my very favorite memories from there was there was a kind of a Martin Luther King Jr. impersonator guy.
Yes.
And he did in the little church there.
Yep, in the basement.
He did the I Have a Dream speech.
Which he'd memorized.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. It was just as powerful listening to him give that speech as the very first time that I ever heard it. But standing in that place where Martin Luther King Jr. had lived his life, listening to the words, feeling all the emotion and the heart behind it, it really just made the whole thing come to life. Because it wasn't just, at that point, it wasn't just words on a page or something you watched on a video.
Right.
It was a real person with a real passion and a real message. And you could just imagine just the whole thing.
Yeah, I was almost holding my breath.
Oh, I know. I couldn't stop the tears.
It was pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Over the winter months, when we were back in Texas, we visited the Alamo. And this was the first time that the kids had been to the Alamo. I mean, we've been several times. San Antonio is where we went on our honeymoon. But then in context of other conflicts around the country over the history of the country, this place seemed to come alive to me. Like the history just became more vivid. It was about people giving their lives in pursuit of an ideal on both sides.
Yeah.
And the lengths that people are willing to go to for a cause.
Yeah.
So to be in that place again on that hallowed ground in Texas, that just meant so much more this time around.
Yeah, I agree. Another thing that happened in the winter while we were in Texas was Emily got to go participate in a program called Teen Pact. It's a program that happens at the Texas State Capitol building in Austin, Texas. And it's designed to help students understand the political process, value their liberty, and engage the culture. And through hands-on and practical teaching, the Teen Pact students learn how to embrace their call as the next generation of leaders, find encouragement among like-minded peers, and develop the skills to engage the culture. And you got to tag along with her.
I did.
What was that like?
It was cool. I mean, I had been to the Capitol building before, but going with her, she was pretty excited about it.
She was. She looked so cute too. She was all businessy.
she had her business suit on, what she had got especially for the occasion, and she had at that point she was still sort of hanging on to the idea of maybe one day becoming a state senator.
How old was she then? Like 12, 13, somewhere around
13 years old. But of course, like she's always been mature for her age. But she fit right in. I mean, she just came across a bunch of other kids that were wired up the same way she was. And to see her being able to exercise her ability to debate in an environment where she's supposed to, rather than at
with
home,
mom and dad.
it was like really cool to see her in her element.
Yeah, it was a great experience for her. That was really neat. So we also made a stop in Houston, and we visited a few educational places there. We visited the Houston Aquarium, NASA Johnson Space Center.
Nerdle alert.
And also the Houston Museum of Natural Science. And that place I really remember well because it had a special exhibit that day that we went, and it was mummies. They had all these mummies, but not Egyptian mummies. They were like
1800s.
Yeah.
It was odd.
A lot of them, I think they had like donated their bodies to science or something.
Yeah, there was something like that. There was a family that wanted to be mummified.
Yeah, it was odd, but it was like cool odd.
Really weird. So don't take our word for it. You'll have to Google that one and find out what on earth that was all about. But it was kind of odd. It was almost like Halloween. There Then we visited the San Jacinto Battleground and State Historic Site to learn more about Texas history. While we were there, we got to tour the USS Texas battleship.
Yeah, that was really neat.
It was. I remember Emily was afraid of heights.
Oh, she was terrified.
And you have those ladders that go up from deck to deck and down. And she knew if you went up them, you would have to come
back down them.
So she was not interested.
Tyler loved all the big guns that were on there. He wanted to sit in the seat.
You could sit in the seat. You could crank them left, right, up, down. It was pretty cool.
It was cool. So after our first stop out of Texas in 2017 was also a favorite of mine. We visited the Chickasaw Nation in Sulphur, Oklahoma. So while we were there, we visited the Chickasaw Cultural Center.
Yep.
And that was a great place to really learn about the people and the culture and the food. Oh my goodness, was that our first experience of Indian tacos? It might have been our second.
Second, yeah. But,
so good.
And this time we knew what we were in for, so we were like tracking them down.
Sign me up. So we also learned about their traditions and their history. The most memorable and probably emotional thing for me was in that little museum there. They had a hallway that was just filled with kind of life-size sculptures or structures and some cutouts and stuff. But you walk down the middle of it and you had people on both sides of you, or these statues on both sides of you. And it was a depiction of these people walking the Trail of Tears. So you had like a mom and a son with a tent set up and, along the trail and just super powerful, emotional, just young kids to old people and just everything in between. And then there was a statue outside the building when you first arrive. I stood there just staring at it for the longest time. It was a statue of a multi-generational family.
Yeah.
And so it had the mom, dad, kids, grandparents.
Yeah.
And the mom was the rest of them were all walking forward. They were looking forward. Mom was standing behind them and she was holding the baby and she was looking back.
Yeah.
And I just, whoo.
Yeah. Yeah. They did a great job of putting you right in that picture. And of course, like for us with our history that we were living out as a family, we were traveling from place to place as a family.
Right.
Really sort of seeking out where the Lord was leading us. I mean, there was no master plan on this thing.
No.
There was a plan.
Yeah.
But it was kind of loose at that point. So we kind of identified to some extent, at least with the traveling part and traveling as a family and imagining just taking care of the basic needs of your family while you're trying to make ground from one place to another. And taking elderly grandparents with you.
Yeah.
It just, it was something.
Yeah, that was no doubt a rough time in history. And it was really interesting to see it through the eyes of those people.
Yep. One of our favorite things about learning in this way, being in those places, is experiencing the different viewpoints of the people that surrounded these events in U.S. history. We learned that there were at least two sides to every
sometimes
story.
More.
Sometimes more. North, South, settlers, Native Americans, Union soldiers, Confederate soldiers. When you travel around, you come across these points in history that everyone learns about in school, and is often part of the current conversation about things that are happening today. But as you travel and go to these different geographic locations, you're entering into different cultures as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And people that have grown up in those regions. So you get like more of a holistic viewpoint of those events.
Exactly. Yeah. Our next stop was in Wichita, Kansas. We visited the Old Cowtown Museum, where we basically stepped into life on the frontier in 1860.
It's a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. It has 54 historic and recreated buildings from the time period. And we literally walked through history. We walked the streets of the little town and some of the buildings. I mean, there were churches and banks and general stores and the dentist and a barber shop. I mean, just everything that would have been in a little 1860s town.
Including the people.
Including the people, yeah.
Dressed in
full garb, the blacksmith, and just the things.
And they knew what their backstory was. So they played those characters, which was really, really neat to just fully immerse yourself in that time period.
Yeah, there was also a saloon.
Yes.
That was really fun. I think we ate in there, and we got to sit in there when the guys that were, they had some actors in there that were all sitting at a table, and they were getting kind of loud and rowdy in the saloon. And then...
Yeah, there was some shenanigans, and then it ended up with a shootout outside the saloon, which we got to... They took it outside.
Yeah, they took their argument outside, and it got a little heated.
And we all followed. It was great.
It was pretty fun. But then everybody came back to life, and we took a picture of the kids with all the actors.
Yeah, they dusted themselves off, and
then they were friends again.
Yeah, they were friends again. Yeah, it was cool.
It was really fun.
In Independence, Missouri, we visited the National Frontier Trails Museum. It was all about the pioneers and America's westward expansion. So we toured the exhibits. We took a covered wagon ride. We saw we even saw the wheel ruts in the.
What do they call those? Swales? Is that what they're called? I think that's what they're called.
Yeah, maybe. But there were the ruts in the road because this was the beginning of the Oregon Trail, and so the wagons would leave the town square and start down on this old road that's still there, and so you can see those wheel ruts. So just to see the number of wagons that must have gone through there,
thousands, yeah, for sure. And that was a really neat experience. And just to imagine the emotions of those people, the excitement, the fear, the unknowns, like all the things when you're leaving on a big adventure. Some of them, I think, at that point in our journey, we could totally relate to that because.
Yeah, you have that. They must have had that initial excitement, just like we did when we.
Yeah, and then that panic of like, oh, what are we doing?
Yeah, and then the reality of it as you go forward and realize that it's not all about adventure.
It is an adventure, but there's also some really kind of difficult parts too. Sometimes
the reason it's an adventure is because sometimes it can be very risky.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. That's also the first time we learned about what they called trail trash.
Yes.
And we learned about that in the museum there.
Yeah,
so we kind of laughed about that.
Yeah, that was where there were examples of trail trash that was left behind.
A piano, a grandfather clock. Yeah, it's crazy what some of those people brought with them.
And these wagons, I mean, you see them on the movies and stuff, but when you see a recreation of one in real life, they're tiny.
Yeah, and the wheels, the wheels would break off sometimes.
I would imagine so, yeah.
So our next stop after that was Watkins Woolen Mill. This site has been preserved to give visitors a sense of life in the 1870s. The mill, interestingly enough, is the only 19th century textile mill in the United States with its original machinery still intact. What did you think of that place?
That was one of my favorites, and we've passed that place many times just off of I-35. And I wanted to go back there. Yeah. It's a time capsule.
It is.
Basically, what happened is that the bottom fell out of that business. It just wasn't a way to make money anymore. So they downed their tools and walked away. Yeah. And left it as is. Now, I'm sure that they went through and had to sort of fix some stuff here and there.
Probably.
But largely, the contents of that place are exactly as they left it.
Yeah. Yeah. It was really interesting to walk through and see all the machines that spun the wool and the huge looms and spools.
Yep.
And the whole operation was powered by a steam engine and a 30-foot riverboat boiler. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, and how many floors were there to that place? I'm sure it was fairly.
I don't remember.
4.
There were some that we couldn't go up to because it wasn't stable.
Yeah, but it was. But to imagine all of the machinery was tied together with belts.
Yeah,
like these belts would go all the way down through different axles right back to the original steam engine.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine the noise of that place.
Yeah, it would have been so loud.
Our next stop was the first of many Abraham Lincoln stops that we made along the way. We began in Springfield, Illinois, of course, and toured the only home that Abraham Lincoln ever owned. He paid $1,500 for it in 1844. The home grew and expanded over the years as the family grew. The Lincoln family lived in this home until he was elected as the 16th president in 1861, when the family moved on to Washington, D.C. What did you find interesting about the house?
It was really interesting to get a glimpse into Lincoln's life there. I think the things that stood out to me the most were the ornate wallpapers and carpets.
Yep.
Keeping in mind this was kind of a recreation of what was there when they lived there.
Yep.
But they were pulling from old pictures of what it was. So it just was very ornate. It was really, really interesting. It was definitely something for its time, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I remember when we first walked into the house, Lincoln's top hat.
Oh, yeah. It was hanging on the coat hook.
Yeah, as you went in the door. Yeah. And that was like the piece that sort of took your breath away as you walked in.
Like, oh, yeah, this really was his house.
Yeah.
Our next stop was the Lincoln Tomb in Springfield's Oak Ridge Cemetery. We made sure to stop and rub the iconic statue of Lincoln's lucky nose. And of course, we had to visit the Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum.
In Kentucky, we visited his birthplace, where a memorial building houses the symbolic birthplace cabin.
Yeah, it's actually like there's a huge kind of monument building that's been built around this replica of the cabin.
It's a big contrast. So the building around the cabin is got the Greek architecture, the columns,
huge columns. Yeah,
it's something else. And then you go inside, and there's just this
humble little replica of the cabin,
tiny little cabin.
And then we had to check out his boyhood home. The Knob Creek Tavern, a log home, was where he formed his earliest childhood memories. As we roamed around the property there, it was really fun to imagine him as a young child running and playing in the fields that were, by the way, completely full of wildflowers.
And ticks.
Oh, yeah, that was where we
were like, why is there no one wanting to walk down to the stream, where his childhood friend rescued him from drowning?
Yeah.
And so we're like, that's so odd, because people would go up to the buildings and then just walk away.
Yeah.
So we're like, let's go with the dog. Let's take the dog down there and look at the stream and check it all out.
It was beautiful.
And then we come back and we sat there for hours picking off these stupid freaking ticks.
Yeah, that was a good time.
After the summer, we headed west through South Dakota, where we learned about the Lakota people. And we got to see the beautiful dignity of the Earth and Sky statue. And if you are not familiar with it, then you should Google it. It is huge.
Yeah, it is. It's really beautiful. We actually, when we passed it the first time, it was daylight. And we were like, oh, we've got to go back and see this at night, because we were reading on the signs and stuff that it lights up at night. So we actually did. We drove back and saw it at nighttime lit up. Oh, it's just stunning. Mm-hmm. So then we headed for Badlands National Park. Now, a side note on this was probably one of our very favorite camping experiences ever.
Yes.
We dry camped on national grasslands that overlook the Badlands. And from that spot, we watched the Perseids meteor shower in those dark skies. It was just absolutely breathtaking.
Yeah, and that's the picture of our fifth wheel RV on the edge of the cliff is something that we've used on a lot of our social media stuff.
It was very photogenic, and it was a very cool experience.
It was.
So from there, of course, we did visit the Badlands National Park.
Yep.
And the kids completed another Junior Ranger handbook as we learned about the area, the animals, and the history of the park. And Paul probably has a little bit of an animal story he'd like to share with you.
Well, yes, there is a particular animal in this park that is very prevalent. And they look really cool and almost a little sweet, from a distance. And so the bighorn sheep that are in that area are bigger than you think when you get in close proximity to them. And especially when they are standing on a ledge above you.
Yeah.
As you're trying to scramble up the same ledge. And that was part of Tyler and I's fossil hunting expedition. Tyler really wanted to find some fossils. Mm-hmm. And I kind of really wanted to explore a little too. And so we set off down into the Badlands from our lofty position, probably 120 feet above, maybe, or even more than that, maybe. So, it was a question of going down to the next, spot down the cliff and, digging away and see if we could find some fossils. Couldn't find anything, carried on. Eventually we ended up right at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Where there's no cell phone service.
No cell phone service. Yes. And then we looked back up the cliff and realized we've got to scramble back up this thing again. And that's where the problems set in, because I'm describing it as a cliff. That whole area is made up of like shale, sand, some sandstone. It's very loose. Mm-hmm. And it has eroded over many years. So you're picking your spots to climb up between these gullies that have been worn away by the rain and trying to make your way up from place to place. So, of course, Tyler was small at the time, so I could give him a leg up anywhere, he needed. But then I had to scramble up behind. Mm-hmm. And at one point, we got to this spot where we knew we would have trouble, where we had to get up on top of it's probably about an 8-foot sort of ledge. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking up, and there are bighorn sheep staring down at us, sort of rearing back as if they're gonna, pounce on us.
Yep.
And so, I got Tyler up there. I scrambled up. We eventually got back up to the top where you and Emily were about ready to...
I was about to call for help because I didn't know where you were and you weren't answering your phone. I think it was after that we got we got really high quality walkie-talkies.
We did because Daddy can't be trusted.
No. Mm-mm.
But it was fun.
Oh, I have no doubt.
Then we visited Mount Rushmore, and we actually got to meet a man that had worked on Mount Rushmore between 1938 and 1940. He was there with his wife, and they were available to talk to, and he had his book, which he would sign for you.
Yep.
So that was neat to meet someone who was actually there working on it.
Yeah. And then we went and visited the Crazy Horse Memorial and learned all about the history and heart behind that huge undertaking that is obviously still being continued today. And we learned more about the history of the Lakota people and got to watch a really cool hoop dancing demonstration.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
It was really interesting.
And we also got to see Shaq's shoes.
Oh, we did. They had this... totally eclectic random display of things. Yeah. And one of the things was Shaquille O'Neal's pair of tennis shoes. And they're massive.
They're huge.
It was interesting.
Basically one of the founders of the place.
Yeah.
And he had gathered a bunch of random things into his museum that would probably make a great story when you're sitting around the campfire at night.
Right. No joke.
As we continued on from there, our travels west took on more of a scientific theme as we saw the geology of this country. But we absolutely loved learning about the history of this country by visiting those historical sites along the way.
Yes. I love learning history from different perspectives. It's always important to remember that there are two sides to every story. And just because you believe something to be true, that doesn't mean that someone else who comes from a different culture or perspective is necessarily wrong. There's probably truth and misunderstandings on both sides. That's probably the biggest thing I learned on this journey. When we take the time to hear someone out, listen to where they're coming from, acknowledge the heart and soul of the person before judging, we can learn so much. God created all of us to be unique individuals with different personalities, insights, opinions, gifts, and experiences. Each of these qualities shape the person into whom they are meant to be. I would say that our travels and experiences of studying history along the way have opened my eyes so much to seeing the individual rather than classifying people into categories. I have come to the conclusion that if we were to just sit down and have a conversation with people who aren't just like us, we will find that we have more in common than we originally thought. How about you? What would you say that you took away from our drive-through history experience?
Well, I'm going to pick one of the words that you said, conversation. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, these differences express themselves in debate. Mm-hmm. And that comes from a predetermined desire to win the debate.
Right.
A conversation is where you're looking to develop a relationship with someone.
Right.
And so from our experience, I got to see for myself those different perspectives and just kind of got excited about the possibility of talking to people that had those different perspectives.
Right.
And so it's not like you loosely hold your own values. You still obviously have your own experiences and your own, the things that are important to you. But when you're in conversation with another person, making a relationship with another person, to some extent, you can put those things on one side and find out the commonalities. Mm-hmm. I think in particular, the traveling part, mm-hmm. This is such a vast country.
Yeah.
And the people that have lived here over many, many centuries mm-hmm. have always had travel as part of their experience.
Yeah.
Whether it was following the herd of bison mm-hmm.
Across
the plains.
The weather.
Mm-hmm. There was always the element of travel mm-hmm. and traveling together as families. Mm-hmm. So, of course, like we were driving at 65 miles an hour along an interstate
right.
with our RV, which is very different. Uh-huh. But you could just sort of picture that mm-hmm. and some of the things that get prioritized differently when right. you're living together and traveling together.
Yeah, I agree. I am so thankful that our kids got to learn the history of this country by standing in the middle of battlefields, touring the homes and businesses of important leaders, hearing stories of real people who struggled, hearing stories of heroes, and the stories of people of faith. We got Civil War history from both sides of the line, and the stories vary. We got stories of settlers and Native Americans from both sides, and guess what? The stories vary, but I love that. What that means is that we can take all that we learned from these different people, different experiences, different places, and we can draw our own conclusions and try to learn how to love people better today.
The Bible tells us in Ephesians 4, verse 2, always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. When we approach people with humbleness, gentleness, and patience, we are better able to see where they're coming from, and we're better able to develop a relationship with them and learn from the experience. Thank you for listening today. If you know of someone who would enjoy this podcast, then please tell them about it. Visit us at Beautiful View Podcast on Facebook or Instagram. Share our posts or share the link to our podcast. In our next episode, we are going to talk about our blended family.
Blended families can be tricky, and ours is no different. I think many of our listeners might even be surprised to learn this part of our story, and many will also, no doubt, be able to relate very personally. Mm-hmm. We will be sharing insight from Paul's oldest daughter, Vicky, who came over from England to live with us when she was 9 years old.
Thank you again to Tyler and Kelsey for permission to use your beautiful song on our podcast. You can check out The Hopeful Few on Spotify or Apple Music. The links are in our show notes.
If you have questions you would like us to answer or suggestions for things you would like us to talk about in future podcasts, email us at beautifulviewpod@gmail.com.
please consider joining us at the Beautiful View Patreon channel. Again, the link is in our show notes, and it is also on our social media accounts.
We hope you have a great day, and remember to always keep an eye open for opportunities in life to see a beautiful view.
We could climb a mighty mountain, float on down a winding river, travel back in time and face our future too. Oh, I'm not scared of where I'm going, 'cause I know whose hands I'm holding. Oh, I'd go anywhere as long as you're going too. And I'd go anywhere as long as I'm with you. Yeah, I'd go